And, I thought that today maybe I would try to cut it a little bit shorter and leave plenty of time for us to have a conversation too. Because it's like as quickly as you can write a talk about AI and the future, like the next day we're in like a new hellscape. I don't know. Or it's like we're in a new situation that we could update. Right? So let's talk about anything you want to talk about today in our Q&A. And typically I don't write out my remarks. I like to just kind of freestyle, but I'm working out some new ideas. And so as scholars are wont to do, when we're trying to work out the new ideas, then we tend to write those things down a little bit. So please give me your feedback. And let's see if we can't go on a little bit of a journey today. I will tell you that given the nature of the words on the slide, like oppression, this never feels like a warm and fuzzy talk. But I hope that by the end, we will have some provocations or some things to think about that maybe don't leave us completely flatlined and ready to head to the bar. All right, so first I want to say thank you, Professor Williams, for that lovely introduction, and I want to thank the organizing committee, the students, and the faculty and staff who worked so hard to bring this event together and to require you to come if you're a student for their classes. Very grateful for that. It really is a privilege to stand before you as critical makers and stewards of knowledge, and to share a bit of the cautionary tales about the use of data, algorithms, and AI, as well as predictive tech, which we can talk about. And we're going to talk about these in the spirit of this Rockwell series called Rebooting Our Relationship with Tech. And I want to also just say, well, first of all, I was playing a little bit of D'Angelo, R.I.P. D'Angelo, here before we got started, but I want to also acknowledge I live and work on the unceded territory of the Gabrielino and Tonga peoples' lands, and I'm grateful to be here on other people's lands that do not belong to me and to be a visitor here. And I'm also very grateful that I have the matriarch of my family is here with me today, my Aunt Daris, who is also a Houstonian now, and it's really an honor to get to share my work with my family and with this broader community. So I just want to say thank you. And a little bit about her, if you see her over here in the corner in the black and white plaid, she was really one of my first role models around computers and technology back, I won't say in what decade, because then she's going to be like, you didn't have to age me, but a long time ago. She was one of the first women really involved in computing and had a degree in computer science when I was just a kid. And not even understanding for me, I look back on my own life and think how taken for granted it was that to see a Black woman in computing. And my mom was one of the first people in our hometown in Fresno to have a personal computer. She and her colleague drove up to San Francisco and stood in line for the very first Apple computer. And they drove those two computers back to Fresno. And here, two women had the first two computers, as far as we know, in Fresno, personal computers. And I was on the internet back when it was dial-up and the text-based internet, and so many of you were not born yet. But I will tell you that it's interesting to have a long arc view of kind of what it was before and what it is now. And I hope that you all, many of you, who've joined into these conversations about tech and society today, will 3 decades from now, 4 decades from now, be where you are and talk about how terrible it was then in 2025 and how much greater and more incredible and democratic and pro-social and pro-rights our technology environment is. And we are not in that moment yet, but I look forward to the things that you all are going to bring into existence. So this is a little bit, here we have Algorithms of Oppression in the Wild. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that book because I already know that some of your professors have made you read that and you're tired of talking about it and you did your part already in class. So I will just say a little bit about where I locate myself as a scholar. I'm one of now a kind of what I think of as a rapidly growing community of scholars of color who think critically at the intersection of race, gender, sexuality, and technology. And you should take a picture for your summer reading. These are some incredible scholars here. My little laptop icon can't capture enough of the faces here, so I try to rotate them sometimes. But if you're interested in these conversations at the intersection of race and technology, here's some wonderful people that you can read. And now let me turn to our inspiration for today. So I've been writing in the tradition of African American studies or Black studies as an information scientist. I have a PhD in library and information science. I really consider myself at the core an internet studies scholar, even though we don't have really internet studies departments yet in this country. Again, some of you might help bring that into existence. And I think about the work of someone like W.E.B. Du Bois now at this kind of moment, and I want to invoke his kind of great inspirational, enduring sociology and his theorization of double consciousness. In his 1903 canonical book, The Souls of Black Folk, this book for me, here we are in 2025, reaching back to 1903 for an anchor to help explain and help us understand or explore the impact of algorithms and AI. And, you know, I'll say up front that I, too, am a sociologist at heart and in practice. And so I really want to center his voice. And part of what's exciting about writing at the intersection of tech and society is centering different voices than the voices of Silicon Valley, which are pretty much the voices that are in your head all the time. So the things that we have come to believe about technology generally emanate from the marketing hype, propaganda, depending on your vantage point, of people who work and lead Silicon Valley. And so instead, I want to kind of take a detour into the past. Let me just say that in 2012, when I deposited my dissertation at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, I did know it was a grand project to try and take on the racial and gender politics of automated decision-making systems like a search engine. Back then, it was very difficult to make sense of these kinds of systems. I'm grateful in some sense over a decade later that we know these words like algorithm, and I can tell you that when I first started writing about algorithms, people were like, stop, what is that? What are you talking about? And now no one here doesn't know what an algorithm is, and certainly if you don't walking in today, you will walking out. It was really, I think, the work of thousands of scholars, activists, journalists, parents, and students who are engaging with the consequences and affordance of algorithms and the massive amounts of data that we're really now starting to get more clarity about what new AI systems mean to all of us personally, but also because they've shared with us the kinds of things that they're experiencing in their homes, at school, and in the media. And so I want to encourage us, as we're grappling with some of the challenges of AI, to kind of keep taking on the very difficult ideas, or grand ideas, if you will, and make them legible to each other and to the public. And that's one of the most incredible aspects of having the privilege to work and attend a university, is that we get to be in a world of ideas, of science, of facts, and of evidence, and to grapple with those things with philosophy, with art, with culture, and then to help make legible the value of the struggle over ideas to broader publics outside of the university. And this is a really important moment that we're living through, where all of our universities around the country are under immense threat and certainly under immense pressure to even continue to exist. So I want to encourage you, for you who are students and especially graduate students, take on very, very difficult problems. Because the world is full of problems in need of your ideas and the solutions that might come and stem from your study. When I was thinking about algorithms as being political, that they were in fact a set of values and they were created by people who had various worldviews that they could enact through these kinds of systems. I was talking about that at a time when people would say, Safiya, an algorithm is just math. It's just programming, right? It's just, they had a hyper-reductionist view. And that's a little bit like asking the biologist, what does it mean to be human? And they say, well, it's to be cells and mitochondria. They're not wrong. It is that. But there's far more to the picture than that. And that is really the thing that has been so important for social scientists and humanists to bring to the conversations about AI in this moment. So let's get to it. I could have alternately titled this talk today, A Manifesto for Data in Society, not Data as Society. And I'm going to try to unpack that with you a little bit. So this desire to represent the world as it is and as it could be remains a hallmark contribution of the work of W.E.B. Du Bois. His data visualizations and representations of Black life through sociology, fictional stories, photography, maps, graphs, infographics, and illustrations have been central to narrating a world of possibilities free from oppression that run counter to the world we have known. I'm sure that many of you know the 2018 work. Well, the professors in here know, and so everybody else is off the hook. You don't have to know. You know the work of Whitney Battle-Batiste, Britt Russert, and their representations of W.E.B. Du Bois's data portraits visualizing Black America, which I highly recommend as a way into thinking about the power of data to represent our world in service of expanding civil and human rights. Today, we live in an unprecedented time of information bombardment, decontextualized data, and we have continued a long history of weaponized propaganda used in service of the worst human impulses: war, violence, class warfare, and human destruction in many forms. Yet in the face of these challenges, and in the tradition of Du Bois, we have art and inspiration to remind us of the unlimited possibilities of the human spirit, liberation, freedom, justice, and compassion. We must defy how we've been programmed to think about data and AI today, and we recognize the narratives and marketing coming from Silicon Valley are part of the propaganda machine that serves to undermine our fragile democracy, undo our thinly held up civil rights, and remake our social and economic systems. I don't know if you noticed, if you're not watching the news yesterday, an important case was brought before the Supreme Court that might in fact undo voting rights in our country right now. It's just absolutely unbelievable to say it. Through our research and teaching, we need stark reminders that human expression is the source of consciousness and that our agency and creativity are the animating forces that attune our awareness to both the limits and possibilities of what data can do for us and against us. As many have theorized, labor is central to the human experience and our productive activity and expressions of creativity. Our labor is alienated under exploitative capitalist production, and we are stifled from our own self-expression, creativity, and humanity, and certainly we're experiencing that even more and more in different kinds of AI systems. We can see from the vast accumulation of wealth and increasing global inequality fueled by tech companies and their products, a type of paradox and illusion that AI offers. AI both gives and it takes from us. Many people experience it as a source of inspiration, making AI-enhanced digital art. Others have felt that technologies like ChatGPT have opened up new sources of self-expression and knowledge to them. That these technologies cost us our cognitive capacities. I don't know if you saw recently the MIT study just about a month or so ago that power users of ChatGPT are experiencing up to 40% cognitive decline. So the more you outsource your thinking to ChatGPT, the more you lose your own cognitive capacity. And this is really important. This study showed that people simply became lazier and less able to think and process. They also cost us healthy environments, such as data centers moving into Memphis, Atlanta, and other Black communities, stripping residents of their water supplies, creating toxic pollution, and passing on the cost through increased water and health bills to residents. And let us not forget the pervasive promise of the loss of jobs that Silicon Valley assures us will happen with their AI product deployments too. I'm not going to take a detour to the AI Taco Bell on campus, but someone did tell me about that last night, and I have thoughts, but we're not going to talk about that right now. All right. These are just the tip of the iceberg as we come to know our worlds in industrialized nations through the veil of the tech industry's narration of how we should live, work, and play. Like Du Bois's double consciousness, we know ourselves as humans with agency, while we are related to by technocrats and techno-oligarchs as people and communities who will come to be known only as data subjects. Where we were formerly people, we are now data profiles. Where we were a student, we are now a collection of assessments and unstructured data points collected by education technologies and predictive analytics. Where we were complex faculty and researchers, we are now H-indexes and student evaluation scores. Don't get upset, faculty. I just really whipped them up right now. I could go on, but I won't. I feel like I said student evaluations without a trigger warning, and no, I've lost some of you. Okay, so let us turn now to data science, AI algorithms, and contemporary life. For Du Bois, the promises and perils of data provided a pathway to challenging the racism of phrenology and other pseudosciences that categorized people of African descent as subhuman. He was one of the most important data scientists of the 20th century, and I don't know if you know that, but certainly that's a way to come to know his work. In the face of this, he applied close, critical examination of facts and experience to rigorously study the interiority of Black life in the United States and in the diaspora. His artful quantifications of Black life undermined the eugenicist science that entrenched the biological and social categories of race, categories that still underlie contemporary data science paradigms. The failures and crude categorizations of Black people's expressions, labor, creativity, and dreams by scientists and policymakers were used to organize and instantiate social, political, and economic oppression as early as the 17th century in the Americas. And these systems of discrimination and inequality are often still the substance of what we have come to know as data, whether we're conscious of it or not. Data in the 21st century poses many challenges, and we need a Du Boisian way of thinking about how to interrupt and reimagine it. Many Black people live, and not just Black people, but certainly he was concerned with Black people, live under the data-driven surveillance state on the job, in school, as voters and as suppressed voters, while incarcerated, while driving, while dining, while bird watching, while lying in bed, while shopping, while playing sports, while breathing, while walking the block. And so as I show in the following 3 slides, which really cannot even begin to scratch the surface of the mountains of harms we're seeing, the effects of AI and algorithmically driven systems fail again and again to quantify and represent our lives fairly. Almost every dimension of our lives are under the gaze of digital technology, from digital doorbells and security systems to autonomous cars like Waymos, all disproportionately capturing and selling extremely detailed footage of Black neighborhoods, homes, and pedestrians. If you see Waymos all over your neighborhood, by the way, that means you live in a hyper-surveilled part of the city. Just a thing to know. These are the kinds of technologies that have cameras all around, and really their project when they're not driving people is really to collect data around all of the blocks, all of the communities that they're driving through, which again feeds directly into databases and systems that are accessible to law enforcement and others. So understanding that these kinds of projects, and these, extend to things like digital watches, smartphones in our pockets and bags, listening to intimate experiences and banal everyday interactions. Has Friend hit Houston yet? Have all the billboards for friend.com hit you here yet? You'll see them when you come to LA. These new wearables that are like a little necklace that are kind of targeted towards younger people and are 24/7 listening devices that listen to everything in the environment and then somehow weirdly, like a snarky friend, comment on everything they hear to you, like your conversations with your friends or your employers or your intimate interactions. Friend is a weird, snarky, wearable surveillance tech that comments. And of course, we know that like so many of these kinds of companion, and I say that in quotey fingers, companion technologies, that these companions are actually, they're worse than a terrible friend, actually. So that we beware, that you beware, you've been warned. No friend, not that kind of friend. The data of our lives is really being captured at every turn, with nearly every workplace, school, place of worship, and public space being captured because our communities are often hyper-targeted for digital product and content consumption. So we need to keep the power of consciousness, human agency, and dynamism in the foreground, all of which often is subsumed or obscured by the alleged stability of data and the way that data science systems coarsely sort and reduce human experiences to numbers and other vapid measurements. And I'm just sharing with you here some headlines, and these are things, for you to be aware of. I won't. You can look up any of these papers at your convenience. The science of data, as it reflects society, requires deep humanistic knowledge and inquiry that nuances the complex economic, political, and social systems we experience. These systems collect data points on us at any given moment, and companies attempt to sell, buy, and share data points to develop our digital profiles. I was once at a conference and I heard the director of the FBI stand up and say that as far as the US government was concerned, who we are, who Americans are our data points, our data profiles, that in the eyes of the government, you are the data profile of all of the data that is collected on you at any given moment. Now, what a nightmare. I know I'm not the only person in here that's constantly doing research for other people, looking things up online, participating in all kinds of things. If you study and or are intellectually curious in anything even slightly provocative, that's part of your data profile now too, and who you're assumed to be. And you may have seen even just a month or so ago that Palantir has now, a tech surveillance company, has now been put in charge of data collection on Americans, again, on behalf of the current political administration, federal administration. And this means now that they're openly talking about correlating not just your ChatGPT search history, not just all your social media and all the profiles and everything you've ever liked and everything you've ever posted or commented on, but then correlating that to your financial transactions. If I just keep going, everyone's just going to fall out of their chairs and just be flatlined. But when I tell you that it's a bad scene, it's a bad scene. And that's my professional opinion. All right. So here we are, our creative expressions through art, interpretation, joy, and the spirit, all things that are also, quite frankly, in my opinion, unquantifiable, except in the value chains and markets of capital where our behaviors are modified and our emotions are primed for manipulation by extractive technologies that use things like biological outputs like dopamine and serotonin to seduce us into digital regimes. We have to have this kind of consciousness about our data consciousness. And so the data, it is not the data that is conscious, it is us, we who are conscious about our data. And the ways that we can both resist and remake it as one of the most, I think is one of the most powerful ways we can ensure that our lives are narrated and lived on our own terms, rather than through the data gaze or how datafied systems profile us. So this then brings us to reimagining Du Bois's double consciousness as what I'm framing as data double consciousness. Du Bois describes how Black folks come to know the experience of two-ness in both the interiority of our lives and the contradictions of what is alleged about our lives as we live with racial injustice in America. Double consciousness remains salient in describing the ways we are trained to think through the gaze, the data points, the narration, or even the science of otherness. We know who we are, and we know who others say we are as the other, the outsider. And this was really the concept of double consciousness, was that we know ourselves, and then we live in a society that perceives us differently than we know ourselves. And so we live in this bifurcated world of, anyone who experiences racism or discrimination or sexism or other forms of discrimination, we know how they see us, but we also know how we see us. And that living in that duality and in that struggle, and many times we are actually living lives in resistance to the unfair ways in which we are engaged with and seen and dealt with. And so this is so important for us to have that kind of consciousness about how datafied systems see us, narrate us, relate to us, even though that is not how we truly know ourselves. And this is important both at the individual and at the kind of collective community and society level. All right, I've made that point. So the other thing about what's happening is that data is often perceived as banal, neutral, a set of facts that are left unchallenged by the data scientist who rarely knows the social context from which the data is derived. And this is no shade on my data scientist friends in the room. It's just that there are so many ways in which data is collected and compartmentalized. It's hard to understand or know the source from which all of the data that moves around us is derived, and what it means, and whether it's reliable or not, quite frankly. Double consciousness is the framework we need to understand our datafied selves and the ways we're both represented and misrepresented, stripped of all context that situates our lives in society. And, I've attended to this kind of work in algorithms of oppression, so you've seen this. But I want to kind of give, here's another example of what I mean by data misrepresenting us. This is Deb Raji, who is one of the researchers who was a co-author on a very important paper called Gender Shades by Joy Buolamwini, Timnit Jabru, and Deb Raji. And that paper was the paper that actually is the source of a documentary, the inspiration for a documentary called Coded Bias, in case you've seen that. And Joy has a book out called Unmasking AI, and where she puts the white mask on and the facial recognition recognizes her and she takes it off, and the facial recognition doesn't recognize her face. And they wrote this important paper about how facial recognition technologies are so dangerous because they don't recognize Black women's faces in particular, but the more melanated you are, if you don't know what melanin is, just ask a friend. The more melanated you are, the less reliable AI systems are in being able to recognize you. And so their work was profoundly important in pushing back on technologies like facial recognition. And Deb was one of the scholars on that paper when she was a student, and she writes about things like labeling errors. So here's an example of two hands that are holding thermometers. But in a machine learning environment, as the images are fed to a machine learning model that's going to automatically assign a label to what it visualizes, with the white hand, it recognizes the hand is holding a thermometer and labels it as such. But with the black hand that's holding the thermometer, it labels it as holding a gun or a weapon, right? So this is happening around us all day, every day, where machine learning models are just taking in and they are working a decision tree based on the kinds of things that it has been programmed to recognize or not. And so so Deb has a lot to say about these kinds of things. And this is what's so exciting to me right now about this field at the intersection of data and society, is that you can be like in computer science and data visualization and have a lot to say about what's happening. It's not actually just math that's happening here, right? So very exciting. If you are in a STEM field, double major in sociology or social sciences or humanities so that you have a broader context within which to understand the kinds of projects like a machine learning or data visualization algorithm. And this, of course, is so important because what's happening here is we have not just data, but we have metadata. We have data that describes the data that you see. And talk to anyone here who's a librarian. Our beloved librarians and archivists here in the library will also teach you about metadata, which is an extremely exciting field, by the way. All right. So let me kind of quickly, I'm almost finished here, and then I want to hear from you. So, Du Bois understood the regimes of surveillance and control that were both made and defined by data points. He fought demeaning racist propaganda with his sophisticated information presented artfully by hand. He opposed 20th century eugenics and other racial pseudosciences that were in vogue during his lifetime. Guess what? They're back. And he helped us kind of understand how we could think about the discourses and systems of classification that 21st century Silicon Valley eugenicist movements of today, led by tech luminaries and oligarchs, have resurrected. He understood how aspects of Black life were collected, measured, stored, and analyzed to the point of absurdity to deny freedom and dignity to Black people. And he would have recognized things like this in both facial recognition, autonomous weapons, drones, spyware, deep fakes, and non-consensual intimate imagery of today as continued projects that were working in the disservice of society. I think his conceptualization of double consciousness is the metaphor we need right now to understand the complexity of today's data-driven world. We know that others perceive us in a particular way, as I said, but we want to always stay attuned to how we see ourselves. We're forced to deal with the dissonance and contradictions between how we're framed and conceptualized versus how we know ourselves. Data, it can be distorted, it can be misrepresentative. You've read that in Algorithms of Repression, so you know that these platforms and these systems, they're not neutral. But data also represents a moment in time. It's a snapshot. And this is the part that I think is so incredibly important to me. I think about any given moment of my own life where I was not my best self. My husband will tell you that that is many moments of my life, but it's not true. But think about the moments of your life, especially to get here to young adulthood and plus. And what would it be like if those moments that we were not our best selves were captured into systems and then predictions were made about who we could be based on that experience? And opportunities were precluded from us. There would be no sense in our society of redemption. There'd be no sense or place or space for forgiveness and possibility. There'd be no opportunity for growth, for the unpredictable. Who knows, who would ever believe that a working class kid would be standing at a podium at the University of Houston in 2025. There's just no way, because the data points of the past could never have pointed to this future, right? So I want us to think about why we have to struggle over these concepts and understand with much more clarity and sophistication what it means to have data captured about us and what it means to use predictive systems to make decisions in everything. We know, from college admissions to mortgages to loans to hiring algorithms, all of it. Even some of you are using those to date, and I'm not going to talk about that because that's after my time. I was not part of the online dating scene, so I missed it. All right, so I think I've impressed upon you all the terrible things, and I want to now just turn to some other possibilities. You know, we live with data as a means of telling us who and what we are at any moment, and we're forced to measure ourselves and our value through the eyes of a vast array of data-driven systems. The student knows themselves as a learner until they receive a score that defines their perceived worth and academic achievement. I'm here to tell you, students, stop doing that, okay? It doesn't matter. The score is not the important part. The learning is the important part. The worker knows themselves as reliable until the surveillance system produces reports on their productivity and employers confer or deny promotions. The child knows themselves as a friend, as beautiful, as limitless, until social media defines them as unpopular or unlikable. The data double consciousness grants us both a deeper understanding of ourselves and reframes that self in the interests of those who control our data bodies. We come to know ourselves in myriad ways by what our apps, our images, our representations, and our feedback loops tell us about who we are according to the data. And while the data and so-called artificial intelligence are being pushed to the fore as the paradigm of modernity, technology will never have the substance of consciousness. Data-driven technologies may imitate or be programmed in anthropomorphic ways, that means human-like ways, but these AI-driven models will never be sentient because data lacks what animates life. Consciousness is the substance of our humanity, of our agency, of our souls. I don't want to get into an argument with the philosophy PhDs in here, though, later tonight, okay? Because that might, maybe we have to split hairs. Data, while useful in many contexts unto itself, will never tell the whole story of who we are and, more importantly, who we will become. And for me, this begs the question, can the souls of Black folks, much less anyone else, be represented by big tech's data? We must ask ourselves, for whom does my data or our data serve? What aspects of ourselves live in the gaps, in between the measures, tucked away from the view of categorization, classification, and analysis of any given technological engagement? So this is my hope. And I wrote this in a piece that's forthcoming in an exhibition book for a book put together for an exhibit by Tiffany Barber in New York, where I'm really hopeful we will think of ourselves again about and this challenge, this charge to think between data as society or data in society, and that we will put it in its proper place in society, but that our sociality, ourselves, will not just be the data footprints, it will not just be the digital profile. So may the data proxies and projects never be more important than the human beings, the Earth, and all of its inhabitants. May we never forget that our consciousness cannot be datafied or predicted. It is the raw material that inspires all we are and ever will create. We are so much more than our data will ever show. And the data shows that we are all so much more than we may have ever known. Our charge is to consider data in society, not data as society, for the greater good and for a world free from oppression. And I'm excited to have shared some of these ideas with you, and I want you to push back or tell me absolutely yes, and then we can clap and go home. Thank you.
So we have a good amount of time for questions. Myself and grad student Niam over here, if you raise your hand, we'll come give you the microphone and you can ask your questions.
And maybe you just have a comment, and I know usually we're like no comments, but a comment is perfectly lovely.
Hey, it is already on. My name is Anthony. I'm in the public policy science degree program, and I'm curious, do you think that escaping ourselves being data points, something that's existed pretty much forever since people have been getting Social Security cards. Do you think that's a system or a state of being that we can even possibly escape?
Oh,
Still
sure.
being capitalist.
Sure. Well, I don't know about the last part. When you said since forever and then you went to Social Security cards, you threw me off because that's not very long ago. I think of the kind of enlightenment project of science in terms of classification systems coming into broad practice. There are certainly many societies on planet Earth right now who do not live under those paradigms. And I think, of course, I immediately reach for indigenous communities around the world who have different knowledge systems and logics by which they create value. It doesn't mean that there isn't necessarily measurement per se, but there's certainly not necessarily the wholesale commodification regime that accompanies that measurement. And we're living in a particularly hyper-extractive society, so it's hard to imagine that other people live differently in other parts of the world. And they certainly regulate and think about the limits and placing limits on their technological engagements or the datafication in their society. I was sharing earlier with some students that, one of the most innovative places in the world right now around tech policy is New Zealand, where, New Zealanders have a paradigm like the Earth is a stakeholder. So if we had in the United States or in the West or the global North or the global minority, whatever field we're in, to describe this, if we had the Earth as a stakeholder, we wouldn't even have most of the technologies that we have. We certainly wouldn't be able to justify large language models because they are so environmentally destructive and energy extractive and poisoning. And if the Earth were a stakeholder and we had people who could represent those interests, we would design technology completely differently. That's also a place where you have to prove that there will be no harm for 7 generations before you can bring something into. This is outside the paradigm of most Americans' abilities to conceptualize, and this is very everyday and common. So I think the vantage point is a matter of where one lives and what one is raised up to live under. We also live in a country whose economy, the economy which is predicated upon exploited labor. I mean, we wouldn't have a country without 200 years of enslavement and occupation. And so we can't even really talk about capitalism like it's stable, or inevitable, because there were many stakeholders that were not, that had no rights. So I think, all these things are up for discussion right now, and we're living actually in a moment where all these things are being challenged. The alleged stability. I mean, I think we will probably look back, I don't know, maybe the young people will look back and they'll be like, remember, they'll talk about ChatGPT like my generation, Gen X, talks about 8-tracks or something. Oh yeah, my older sister had an 8-track, that was, how did they live, So I don't know, but I think that the place that's exciting to me is to think about how do we put all the context in, all the information, the knowledge, the evidence that we have about what these projects are, and then make decisions about whether we want them or not. And we are really not in that space. For the most part, many of us are working, especially those of us in education at universities, where most of these projects are being thrust upon us. We don't have a lot of say. I mean, I remember when Turnitin, do you all use Turnitin here? The students are like, yes. I remember as a grad student being told I had to use Turnitin when I was at Illinois, and at UCLA, of course, you are supposed to use it, and I don't use it. And a whole bunch of my colleague friends, we don't use it, because for us, we had an analysis. We were like, why would you put half-baked thoughts that our student writes to their professor into a system, into a database that's privately held that could be searchable later when they're 40 and trying to run for Congress or trying to be a social worker or something, and they were like working it out when they were 19 and it wasn't really there. And that shouldn't follow them the rest of their lives. That should be a different kind of relationship that we have as educators with students. So we just refuse. But, it's hard to just have a bunch of individual people refusing. So we also have to think about our collective power. And we're doing that more and more in the UC. We're trying to look at what's happened in the California State University system and say, well, maybe AI should be something that people bargain over in collective bargaining, and maybe it should be related to differently than a tool, but as a social practice that will radically reimagine even the place where we work and how it works. So, yeah, it's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Noble, for your talk. One of the things I was thinking about toward the end, you made us, this is the thing that happens with STS scholars, where, we're talking about science and technology, we often have to talk about, it's like resisting objectivity by bringing up neutrality, right? It's not neutral. And this is very, very subtle. But one of the things I was thinking, it made me think about that subtle move. One of the things, in what ways your work, this moment, is calling us to really take seriously the limitations of neutrality itself as inherent good, right?
Absolutely.
Because so much of that is like the rhetorical move to like even get people to think about power. But in many respects, that's not enough. Not only is that not enough, the way you're thinking about, is it data double consciousness, correct? As you were talking about the ways that basically we're being not just created into kind of like data profiles, right? But the things that can't be let go. And it makes me think about how much that question of the human is tied to almost like we are the way of neutralizing the human is quite frankly almost making it so human that everything you do has to be tied to you, so that there's on the other side nothing. Like the only way we have this, like there's a kind of it seems to be there's a kind of like neutralizing component around artificiality, where it's like the God trick, but I'm not even sure if there's God. That's a different conversation. Again, philosophers can take that. But just, I don't know, I'm just trying to think about what about data double consciousness requires an engagement with maybe neutrality in a way that the nuances of neutrality, even like Du Bois wasn't necessarily even having to contend with, because even with the double consciousness, the racial dynamics of not just blackness, but in relation to whiteness, what is this thing, like if we have this almost like hyper specification to you versus nothing.
Generalization
what do we do?
or something, yeah. It's really a fascinating question, and I think about, well, certainly, my work has been concerned with destabilizing the notion of neutrality, tech neutrality, knowledge neutrality, information neutrality, libraries as neutral, library practices as neutral, mostly because that has been used in service of mainstreaming certain kinds of ideas that are about the delegitimization or dehumanization of others, right? So in algorithms of oppression, it's like, the 80% of the first page of search results when you search on Black girls is pornography. And I was constantly met for years while I was doing that work with, Google search is correct, right? It's neutral. It's objective. There's no agenda here, because people couldn't even recognize search as ad tech. It was just like so hard. I mean, I would even meet people, very knowledgeable people, who would say like, isn't Google a nonprofit, or it's like the people's. I was just like, what are we talking about? You know what I mean? So it's like very hard too, because so much of our corporatized culture also is a matter of like how companies spin themselves as simply information, right? And I think ChatGPT, OpenAI is doing that. I think, Gemini and other projects are trying to do that too. And so you have to get in there and look at the consequences of what is happening technically in these systems, but then what are the cultural artifacts that they produce that then are acted upon as if they are neutral and therefore reliable and credible, right? And so you're right. The neutral space for people who are traditionally oppressed is the status quo of their oppression. That's actually what the place is. So one of the things I'm always trying to talk to my students and my colleagues, we are always trying to work on is, rather than using this language of de-biasing technology, trying to find the neutral place and of technology, that's not very valuable, because actually everything we do as human beings holds value. So what's more interesting as a question is, what can we identify what the values are in these projects and make projects with different values, which is very different than a neutral technology. And I think we have to get more sophistication in our language around what we think these systems are. Of course, they're, like, as a sociologist, they're political, social, economic, right? But they're also, the hegemony of neutrality works to the benefit of the tech industry. And I think they use that, they have to do that, because they have very, very serious multi-billion-dollar problems like content moderation. And they have armies of people all around the world who are taking things down and cleaning data and taking down the most horrific parts of the things. But people think that these are free speech zones and free speech products. And they use Section 230 as a shield of the Federal Communications, the Communications Decency Act, as a shield, because otherwise they would be liable for what happens in their systems. So they've invested 30 years in arguing their products as neutral so that they didn't have to face product liability and
I said, I'm a first-generation student, so my parents are immigrants, and so that is how I've navigated the world. And so for my research project, I am particularly interested in media studies and hope to pursue a PhD in media studies. But so with my research, which I'm still working through, I engaged with the borderlands theory of Gloria Anzaldúa, and my friend would tell me about Du Bois and the correlations of the idea of double consciousness, and also Gloria Anzaldúa's idea of the new mestiza that I'm still working through it, but I love it. I love queer theory, I love feminist theory, and I also, with my research presentation, I created a paradigm which was adding the frameworks of Yoso, I can't remember her first name, but yes. Tara Yoso, her frameworks of cultural
Tara
wealth.
Yoso, yeah.
Because as you mentioned, and like I said, I'm passionate about accessibility, and I believe, yes, media has been used to oppress us. Because for my research project, I had to also examine how have, because I focus on Latinos, how have Latinos been portrayed by the media, specifically film, and the dominant cultural order. And so I don't know, I'm really interested in like becoming a scholar in this field. I'm looking at UCLA, NYU, U Michigan, but I actually also applied to a fellowship, which I'm still waiting on to see if I will get it, but I hope to intern for the Federal Communications Commission in January to learn about how they regulate these things, because I'm interested in like urban planning and like education and like media, all these things and how they intersect. But I just want to know like any advice that you give to me as also like a first generation student, because I do want to become a scholar, but I also like I am youth, and I believe like right now is the time to act. So, you know, in academia is being so attacked, so I think I will wait a bit to like continue my education. But any advice in those spaces of like the FCC and like potentially, like I'm also looking at interning for like Congresswoman Crockett or whoever gets elected here. I personally hope it's Menifee. I mean, that's who I'm voting for, but make sure y'all vote November 5th here on campus.
Our
but
leader.
yeah, I'm just looking for any
Thank
advice,
you.
and I know that I will probably be engaging with your work and hopefully getting to know you better in the future.
Great.
But that's
Absolutely. Well, first of all, can we give it up for that incredible accomplishment? I mean, this who you are is wonderful. Yes. We're very proud of you collectively. I speak for the collective we in this room, okay? I want you to know, this is for everyone, I want you to know about Melissa Villa-Nicholas, who is one of my colleagues at UCLA, and she has a new book called, I pulled it up so I could get it right, Data Borders, How Silicon Valley is Building an Industry from Immigrant Data, on UC Press. It came out in 2023. And her book before that was called Latinas on the Line, Invisible Labor in Telecommunications in 2022. And she is a lot of amazing, and so there's so much, and she uses like Chicana feminism and surveillance studies, and she's an information studies professor at UCLA, and is just an incredible person, and has a lab that you need to know about. And so hit me up and I'll introduce you to her. But you know, I would say anyone in this room, no matter what you're interested in, if you are a maker of art, if you are a fine artist, you're a painter, paint in a way that helps us remember who we are, that helps move us, that keeps us thinking, that provokes us. If you are a filmmaker, if you're a journalist, you know, like all of the majors, there's really, I think every major can take up some dimension of this work. If you're a biologist, we need you in the conversations about biometrics. If you're a physicist, we need you, you know, thinking about autonomous weapons, you know, all of the kinds of things that you might think, oh, I study a thing that has nothing to do with this. I promise you, you do. And if you're in social sciences and humanities like you have so much to offer us that is so much more sophisticated and nuanced than a person who's not thinking about those things, right? And so this is one of the reasons. This is an incredible moment for us to be thinking about graduate school and protecting and defending the university. Because let me tell you what, I worked some jobs, y'all, before I was a professor, and you don't get to think about the stuff you want to think about when you are on the job. And everybody here knows, because I know you all work. So, you know, it's like if we have the privilege and the opportunity to create the space to be in the university, you know, it's such a precious time in our lives. And we're lucky if we get to stay in it, you know, but if you're a reader, if you're a nerd, if you're like a person who just likes to talk all the time, you should be in a university. Some people are feeling convicted right now. They're like, she's like reading me. So I just, you know, I say that all of these things that you talked about, that you're interested in, are the kinds of things that we are just at the beginning of starting to study and understand. We're just barely into these fields, right? So come help us build these fields, all of you, but you too, specifically you too. All right. Yes. Oh, okay, here and then, okay. I'm not in charge of the microphone. I don't know who I'm saying yes to. I have no business. Yes.
Okay, sorry. I have
No.
a few questions for you.
Okay.
So I guess, because I'm pulling this based on like an answer from one of the previous questions that was asked. Do you feel like AI is going to be one of those things that kind of is like a really big fad and then kind of fizzles out? Or is it going to be more like a crashing, burning train wreck?
Is it going to kill us?
Yeah, is that like,
Yeah.
like, is it, I don't think it, me personally, I don't think it's going to be the fall of humanity or
No.
anything, but like, I'm wondering what your take is on it,
Yeah.
because I don't like AI at all. But
I see why you came. Okay, so I'll tell you, I think that we've already seen the AI hype cycle start to deflate. Okay, so we're already in that moment. I mean, the circulation of trillions of dollars is also a little bit of a, well, it's like, you know, NVIDIA giving the money to Oracle, who gives it to, you know, it's like, it's a little bit of a shell game, all right? We're also seeing, we saw this study again, MIT doing some really important work, a study come out of MIT recently that corporate America is resoundingly rejecting chatbots, okay, because it's creating like 30% more labor costs for employees having to check the veracity of the stuff that the LLM spits out. That's just factually incorrect. So you have about 50% efficacy right now in large language models. Listen, y'all, don't use these to write your papers, because you're gonna get some citations that aren't real, and also you're just cheating yourself. So I think if the chatbots, this is how I look at it, if the chatbots were made for corporate America, really, and American Airlines is like, I'll pass, or whatever company, fill in the blank, Home Depot, I don't know, Walmart. Then after the investment that's been made in these, there has to be a market. So guess what the market is when there isn't a viable market in corporate America? They turn to the public sector to buy these products. And this is what you see as the kind of, to me, like, we've been here before. We should be concerned when every technology under the sun is being adopted by public institutions, because it means there also wasn't a market for their intended audience, but the public good, the public coffers, the taxpayer dollars are available, right? And we have oftentimes, we operate in a sometimes different, I know we're living in the neoliberal university, but we also have a different sensibility. Like, the CFO isn't the only person who makes decisions in a university or in a school system, right? Or a school board, or like all of those kinds of things. So I think we should be looking, I think we are starting to see the industry chasing after and trying to find markets. This is why the federal government is such a delight right now, because most of these are being just sold back to the federal government. But see, most of Silicon Valley was built off of government contracts in the first place, paid for by the taxpayers. So these are the things that I think, again, when we have our systems analysis, then you absolutely have to say, like, well, then, like, if they don't want it and I don't really love it, and like my kids are all like quitting everything and they don't, I met a student who's here, I'm not gonna embarrass them and point them out, but they said they were chronically offline today, and I wanted to reach across the table and give a hug. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so that is also part of the reality, okay? Despite what you hear like from the media hype. I think the other part is it is just not environmentally sustainable. And now I'm gonna plug my colleague Karen Howe, her book, Empire of AI. And I'm going to tell you that if I said anything that was even slightly uncomfortable today, wait until you read Karen's book, and you will have nightmares. But it is the good kind of nightmares that have you like vindicated in what you're thinking. Like, this is not sustainable. These projects, these paradigms, they don't make sense to, you can run a short-term fascist regime on them, right? But you can't, I don't think that even fascism is sustainable or techno-fascism is sustainable. So the question is, while we're in this moment of capture, which we are in, then the question is, what do we want after that? And that is really the space for the dreamers. This is the space for our greatest sense of possibility. Like, what would we rather have instead? And what we're seeing is, we're having music festivals every weekend in LA, music festivals, look it up. And, people are coming out in the streets and they are dancing and they're playing music, and maybe in Portland, they're wearing frog costumes, and people are doing things to signal a different way of wanting to relate to each other and be in this country, right? So we have to take a healthy dose of being with each other and talking about the worlds we want to live in and how we want to do it, and doing comedy. And I just recently took up stand-up comedy because, which is a totally different thing. I'm not doing that today. I was really in my straight role today. But I will say that part of that is just making art as a way to remain vulnerable in the human experience. Do these things. We want to keep doing these things. And I think you're right. I don't think these things are sustainable for the long haul. Yeah.
All right, we have time for maybe just one or two more questions.
Okay.
My name is Angel, and I had a job training AI, so my apologies. Maybe I contributed to the problem, but it gave me some intel and perspective. So I really found it interesting when you said that AI has difficulty recognizing melanated people. So I wonder, is it people of color's willingness to let AI companies use their faces and features to train their technology? Or is it the company's failure of reaching every demographic to train their tech? And then on top of that, would it even be worth it for us to contribute more to AI to correct its bias?
So there's a continuum of a range of scholars who have thoughts on this, and they range from, the first simple answer is the tech companies didn't train their models on black faces, okay, or women's faces, but especially black women's faces. So that's why the products failed. All the off-the-shelf Amazon, Microsoft products. The second thing was that many of them tried to remedy, and I don't know if you caught this story a few years ago, but they were going out into the streets and taking photos of people living on the streets who are experiencing homelessness as a way to build their databases. So that's another huge, giant problem. And that was a news story a few years ago. There are a range of people. I would say there are more people who are technologists and in the computer science fields who want more data and better data to train the models to do better. That is a whole field of people who are interested. They would probably generally call themselves like the ethical AI folks, a subfield of computer science. And then there's a continuum all the way to people like, I would say more like social scientists, people like me, maybe Ruha Benjamin, others who would argue for tech abolition, that some of these products are inherently dangerous. There's not really a broad social value to them other than to extract data or violate our privacy, and we don't need them to get on the airplane because we've literally been through 5 checkpoints before getting up there, right? So we don't need all this, but that data capture is to train models. So there's a range of people who have different points of view about, do we get better data and train the models to do better? Do we abolish some of these products because they're inherently not that valuable in relationship to what they cost us in terms of our privacy, our environment, and society more broadly? It's a great question. You have to figure out where you are in that continuum if you're interested in that too.
I'm sorry, I didn't know I had to say that. But I wanted to ask, in the past, when people would, civil rights groups would organize against like white supremacist organizations, I'm thinking specifically of like anti-racist action, they would go to like KKK rallies and essentially just like shut them down or block the people at those rallies from getting on stage or yell during whatever they were saying, so that whatever they were saying couldn't reach the crowd, essentially, right? But now, white supremacists, instead of getting on stage, they'll just like take a video of you and like put it on social media and get 2 million views. Like their platform is much wider, right? Like their tactics have become more sophisticated. And in a similar vein, I feel like the wealth gap in America is so much larger. Like large companies have so much more power. They donate to both Republicans and Democrats. The anti-organizing tactics are so much more sophisticated than they were in the past. And sometimes I wonder, like, what can we do, like, as individuals to organize in, like, a meaningful way, or to, like, organize in a way that actually creates tangible change in terms of, like, reducing the amount of surveillance that we experience and reducing the amount that, like, harmful AI that, like, destroys our communities is integrated into our daily lives.
Yeah, I love the question. I'm going to say quickly that organize right where you are. It's very powerful to organize as a student and organizing with other students, and there are few other hyper-surveilled places than a university. There are lots of points of surveillance that happen here, from the classroom and turning in your assignments to cameras everywhere on the campus and lots of other things in between. And it's a great, and even just the investment. I mean, obviously we've been in a huge conversation in California and on many college campuses around divestment from surveillance tech and the implications of surveillance tech companies in genocide around the world. So I think you're going to have lots of places and spaces, and we're under more surveillance in the university now because of that resistance that we've seen over the last couple of years, whether it's encampments for Palestine or other kinds of divestment movements that have been happening. That has brought about greater and more intense police presence and surveillance on college campuses, which are places that, if you think in the most, idealistic ways, should be the broadest space for free speech and academic freedom. So that's a very important place right here where you are to notice and see what's happening. And sometimes that's hard, but you can do it. And, I think about all the ways that we are going to be confronted with things like Sora, for example, and like the ability to make it almost impossible for us to believe our eyes. Someone could take a video of me right now and upload it and have me saying things I never said and would never say. So we're moving into this moment now that is so incredibly challenging, and it's going to mean that how I really authentically knew that I was here is I spoke to you, you saw me, we shook hands, we were there. And I don't think we should underestimate the power of our organizing in real life, IRL. I know for a couple of generations of students who have mostly experienced organizing on the internet in the surveillance tech, it's hard to imagine doing it differently. That's actually been one of the more powerful dimensions of what it means for students to gather on campuses and do things together, is that they're just outside of directly trying to organize inside like a law enforcement system. So those are the things you have to get super educated on. There's so many great resources out here. I can try to share them with Professor Williams for people who are interested. The ACLU and other organizations have lots of information about protecting your digital rights, understanding surveillance. Get to know those things, learn them, and think about how to organize hyper-locally, and then connecting those concerns with others, because I promise you there are others who also share those concerns. Yeah, thank you.
All right, I think that's a good place to
We did
end.
it.
I know it's going to take a few minutes for you to get
For us to
out
say hi on the
anyways.
way out.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. But
Thank
let's
you.
thank Professor Noble one more time.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
And be sure to be on the lookout for future programming from the Elizabeth D. Rockwell Center. All right, have a good evening.